Hey everybody, Tom Henderson from RESGEN here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, everyday discipleship, and ways that we as men can give life to others. My guest today is Chuck Hiatt, a friend and leadership mentor of mine that has served both the Lord and people in a variety of ways for over 45 years. Throughout his career, Chuck has been a pastor, the president of Sioux Seminary, the president of the Good Samaritan Foundation, and has been a teacher and trainer at countless retreats and conferences across the country. Upon retirement in May 2015, Chuck launched Hiatt Strategic Consulting, a part-time consulting service aimed at helping churches and charities become better through strategic planning using the alignment process. And in addition to all of that, he's a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a devoted follower of Jesus. On today's show, Chuck and I discuss so much good stuff, including some of the biggest lessons he's learned from walking with Jesus throughout his life, and what a few of his favorite leadership principles are that he finds himself sharing the most as he consults with organizations. We also talk about what he took away from a recent health scare that he had on the golf course, and how a visit he made to his biological father's graveside made all the difference in both his relationship with God and with others. I'm really excited for you to hear this episode of the Giving Life Podcast today. Here's my conversation with Chuck Hiatt. Chuck Hiatt, it is so good to have you here today.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun, and you and I go way back in a lot of different capacities. I mean, so this is a lot of fun, and to be even, most recently, I've been able to be a part of a group that you started. Has that been like probably 4 or 5 years?
4 or 5 years. I was looking at this large stack of books that we've been
been through, and so we meet pretty much every Wednesday at noon. We've been doing that for 4 or 5 years. The group is steadily grown, and obviously there's a few guys here that maybe they're wintering away, or there's some trips that we're all on at different times, but we've been able to be consistent. So thanks for your leadership in that.
Yeah,
I've been a benefactor of that. And so before we get into what I think is going to be a real fun conversation, and it's going to kind of be a little bit all over the map today, because I mean you've got so much different experience and wisdom that I'd love for the audience to hear from you. But before we get into all that, just give a little intro of yourself to the audience, just because, I mean, this may be an introduction to who you are for some people.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's a great place to start. Give some perspective. I've often thought in the later years of my career, people could look at me and think, well, he's had a great life. It's gone smoothly. It's been, easy peasy all the time. And then I start sharing a little bit about my background in a deeper kind of way. And people begin to realize, oh, God's grace has been at work in this situation, like he is in everybody's life.
Yeah.
So that's a perspective that shaped me a lot, to be aware of, growing up in a broken home, growing up before I could remember anything. My mom had remarried. I was the last of 5 Hiatts that were born to my mother, but my biological father left our family about the time I was born, for who knows what reason. Yeah, it never been really clarified. But she remarried, and so this was in the 50s when I was in elementary school, and my name was different than my mom's, and that was awkward and weird because, it happens a lot today, but
yeah,
it was really awkward. And her explanation of his departure or of my biological father was, he was a drunken bum. Okay, well,
so that's what you knew.
That's what I knew. That's what she told me. My siblings talked very little about him, about that situation. Most of my siblings, older, made some effort at some point in time to try to track him down and try to establish a relationship. And 2 things happened out of that. They were disappointed, and my mom was crushed. And that they would do that. So I thought, I'm not going to do that. I don't really need to do that.
Yeah, you don't want to be disappointed. and you don't want to crush your mom.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're like,
yeah. Why? So I kind of let that be. And when I met Janelle, my wife, we started talking about that, and she's very good at getting people to talk and kind of, getting insights. And so we unpeeled a lot of the story about that as we were getting acquainted in our dating years. And she challenged me, should you? I said, I don't know. I'm not sure. So I just left it. It was kind of that way, and went on. We were married. We started having our family, that sort of thing. And then in 1982, I had opportunity to be appointed president of North American Baptist Seminary, now Sioux Falls Seminary. In that summer, I was out in Niagara Falls, New York for the NAB Triennial Conference, and it was the official introduction of me to the constituency as the president of the seminary. On the opening day of that event, shortly after we arrived in Niagara Falls, I get a phone call from my just older sister. And I thought, oh, surely something's happened to my mom, because she never calls me.
Mm-hmm. And you were how old at this time, Chuck?
32.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was on the phone. She said, our dad died. Really?
Yeah.
And my mind at that point, it was, he died in Washington State. So I'm literally, 3,000 miles away from him. But emotionally, I'm much farther away from him than that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was really nothing to do at that point. There wasn't really any sense of grief tremendously. It was kind of like, okay, maybe that chapter's closed. So I went on with my week and did what I needed to do. And we kind of did a slow route home, vacationing a little bit. And I get home, and in the mail's a large envelope from an attorney in Washington State. And it has my dad's will in it. And it lists all the 5 Hiatts, indicating this percent, and $1 for me.
Mm.
So it's like, oh.
So everyone had percentages.
Everyone had.
And you had $1.
Yeah.
So you're thinking, what's the message in that?
What's the message in that? Disinheritance was the message I took that to be. And, for whatever reason, I never talked to my siblings. They didn't really have any explanation. Called the lawyer and said, hey, what's the deal? And he said, well, normally people do that when they're wanting to prevent someone from protesting the estate. In other words, if I'm totally left out, then I have a chance to protest. Well, first of all, there's very little money there. So that's sort of the moot point.
Sure.
It's the emotional
totally
touch of that was like, wow. So I lived with that for a long time, kind of processing. Had an older gentleman who I worked with at that time, older than me, who was wise, and I, sought some counsel from him and kind of prayed through it and left it. Okay, well, that's what it is. It was maybe a year or two after that, the seminary students were doing a special retreat, kind of on-campus spiritual retreat, and they asked me if I'd share my testimony. So I thought, yeah, I could do that. So I started thinking about, how can I do this in a creative teaching method, of way, to communicate in a different way rather than standing. So I got the idea of doing an imaginary visit to the gravesite of my biological father. Mm-hmm. So I made a paper tombstone, taped to the back of a folding chair, and had a probably 15, 20-minute conversation to my biological father's
in front of an audience.
In front of an audience.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't just like in the darkness of your room, you're going to have this interaction because you think it'd be helpful. It's just like, you're putting on a play.
Yeah. And I thought, as I say, it was a creative teaching method to tell my story. Mm-hmm. And what it became for me was an amazing catharsis, a cleaning out of my spirit, my soul, to be able to talk more freely about that, having said that in front of so many. And I've done that, maybe half a dozen or a dozen times since then, places like McCross and Boys Ranch, or at a couple of churches and that sort of thing. And, none of those were ever as powerful as the first one, but the outcome is always somebody coming up and saying, oh man, I'm so glad you told that story because, then they start unpacking their own story. Mm-hmm. You and I have had that conversation.
Yeah. We have some similarities in stories. Yeah.
So that was amazing to be able to see that, experience that, and in a sense bring a lot of cleaning and closure in the context of
and healing. I'm imagining.
Healing his story
in the process. I mean, did you feel like prior to doing that, Chuck? I mean, had you? Because we hear about steps of forgiveness. We hear about the power that forgiveness has in our life. That we can bring freedom and in our relationship with God and our relationship with others. Do you feel like that prior to that you'd already kind of gone through a lot of the forgiveness steps, and this was because you mentioned the word catharsis? So or was that a part of that piece as well?
I don't think it was a very big part of it at that point in time. A lesson I learned from my mother was denial. And as one of my seminary faculty members used to say, denial is a coping mechanism. It's one of several, and it may be healthier than many.
Sure.
Okay. So I probably wasn't focused on it very much at that point. But as you ask that question, as I think about that, how I would advise a person now, then I would, that would be a part of it. Say, write the letter, have the conversation, do the work of, as a spiritual mentor has said to me in an online podcast I'm listening to, the sense of sometimes you can give forgiveness and reconciliation is never going to be possible.
Right.
I can't look my dad in the eye and say, I forgive you. And part of my conversation to him at the end of the story, telling the story, is, hey, I don't know what happened, but I've experienced the grace of God, and I'm extending that to you. So maybe I did, in a sense, get to that point of forgiveness, or at least saying, giving grace, a generous assumption, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the word reconciliation, because a lot of times I think that we can sometimes mean that, we can think that forgiveness means forgetting, and that forgiveness means that reconciliation has to happen.
Yeah.
And in your case, it was not able to happen because he had already passed.
Right.
But in other situations, reconciliation may not need to take place either, because it may not be healthy for the person, and it may not be safe for the person,
right?
Or for the current relationships that they're in.
Yeah.
So at this stage, you're 32 when you get the news, the letter, get home, you receive the envelope, and you kind of go through that process. So at this stage, you're married to Janelle. Yeah. You've got all three boys.
Yes, they're all three born by that time. Yes,
all three boys. Yeah. Which, by the way, so you've been married to Janelle how long?
53 years.
53 years, and then Aaron, Tim, and John are your boys. Tim and John. They're gonna be contributors to this podcast in a couple minutes. Okay. A little bit. We're down the road. I will warn you. And then Aaron lives in New York, correct?
New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And how many grandchildren?
Seven grandchildren.
7 grandchildren, of which you've been able to be such a big part of their lives.
Oh,
which is absolutely amazing. We've already been brainwashing our boys and saying, please make sure you live near us or close to us so that we can be a part of
do these things.
Do these things, because that hasn't been always been a part of my kids' life. And so what a great joy that I know that is for your grandkids, but also for you and Janelle. It's just such a huge thing. So when you begin to kind of do this creative way of telling your story, did you feel like even doing that helped you as a husband and as a dad? Did you feel like any of that kind of stuff that maybe hadn't taken place yet, that it had any hindrances in your current relationships, or not so much? And the reason why I ask a question, Chuck, is because I know that there's so many times when we have hurt, when we have different, struggles in our past, that sometimes we can bring those into our current relationships.
Right.
And that those can hinder the growth in those relationships. So I'm just, wondering, did you see any kind of growth in your marriage, or even in your role as a dad, no matter how great or small, because of how the catharsis that was?
Well, Tom, when you ask that question, my mind flashes back to I think it was the sophomore year of college. I was at the University of Northern Colorado for the first 2 years, and I was in the sociology class. I was a sociology major. And the professor was talking about divorce statistics, saying that the children of divorced families are like 33% more likely to have their marriages end in divorce. And I'm sitting in one of those, armchairs that you sit in college classes. And I said so clearly to myself, that will not happen to me. A decision of the will. So from that point forward, it was like, okay, I'm focusing on that. I'm going to break the chain, because a number of my siblings have been divorced, and some of that has continued on in unfortunate ways. And I just said, no, it's not going to happen. Now, I recognize you can say that, and sometimes
do the work.
You do the work, yeah. But that was a decision of the will. It's I'm moving in this direction. I'm going to be investing in my marriage. I'm going to be investing in my kids in a way that no one ever invested in me.
Yeah.
Frankly, when Tim, our oldest, when Janelle announced to me that she was pregnant with him, my first response was, oh my gosh, I don't know how to be a father.
Yeah.
To which she said, you should have thought of that before.
I wasn't really thinking about it at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember. Yeah. When Laura came to, well, number one, when Laura dropped off, she came, I was youth pastor in Oregon City Church Nazarene at the time, and she brought in the little booties.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's no, we didn't have cell phones real life. They could send a picture anymore. Yeah. There wasn't any kind of exploding blue or pink.
No reveal that.
No thing. Right. But the first thing was, I was like, that's not true. There's no way. You can't be pregnant. That's not real. That was my first thing. But then I remember vividly going, man, I was fearful.
Now
I was saying, yeah, I don't know. What if I'm not cut out to be a dad? I didn't necessarily have my net around for the vast majority of my life. And I remember when, because my parents split up when I was 9, and that's when my mom moved us from Southern California to Sioux Falls. And I remember when Isaiah turned 9, I just had this overwhelming feeling, on his 9th birthday, of just going, I can't imagine, not having, day in, day out interaction with this kid.
What would he feel if you walked away at that point?
Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the feelings that you're sharing there, I resonate with those so much. And so when you were in college at that time, so you had not even met Janelle at that time?
No, we were dating.
We were
dating at that time.
But even just the recognition of saying, prior to entering marriage, prior to becoming a dad, we're not going to enter this with a I can get out mentality.
Right.
But I'm gonna make this a statement of the will. And then we're going to just allow the Lord to be our foundation, because at that time you're both serving the Lord.
Yeah.
And wanting, him to be the foundation of a relationship, and then see his faithfulness unfold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that was, you think about the investment of time and energy and focus and priority. That's some of the stuff you do to make that happen. You say, okay, I am going to be present. I'm going to be at those events. And I traveled a lot when I worked for the seminary, when my boys were in the kind of the growing up stages, but I missed very few of their events. When a new activity was signed up for, whether it was a musical thing or an athletic thing, it's like, what's the schedule? When's the performance? What's going to happen? And I blocked that out. And as much as possible, I was able to be around for those. So that was important on my part to do that and to be committed to being in that.
Yeah, I remember Max Lucado in one of his books that I remember him talking about just being present, and you may not be able to make all your kids' events, but when you can, do it.
Be there.
Yeah, just be there. And so all right. So you mentioned. Thank you, by the way, for kind of unpacking just a little bit more of your story that really has, we're all products of our past.
Yep.
So yeah, I've said it on the podcast before. I think you and I have said, but we don't have to be prisoners of it.
No.
And you've walked in the freedom of that forgiveness, and then in the freedom of just saying, I can break you said break the chain. We had when I first launched RESGEN, we had a whole section called Break the Cycle that just talked about saying, hey, look, just because this has been your history in your family, through Christ's help especially, you can break that cycle. Yeah. And just because this has been part of just however many generations, it can start fresh and start with you. So, I love that you said that. So you've worn a lot of different hats. You've over the course of your full-time career,
Right.
Whether it be pastoring, to you mentioned president of the seminary, to the president of the Good Samaritan Foundation, to just being a speaker, consultant, all those kinds of things. Do you have like a favorite position that you've held over the course of those years? I mean, I know they all have like different elements of them that you love, but is there like a position that you're like, man, if I had to narrow it down, I'd say this is one of my favorite ones?
Well, being president of the seminary was probably the apex of my career in terms of, I was significant, and it was really great years at the seminary. At that point, things were going well. But interestingly, in 2018, the fall of 2018, I started a 14-month interim here in Sioux Falls at First Baptist Church. So I was preaching every week to the same people, in series, going through books of the Bible, that sort of thing, doing a little bit of pastoral care. Didn't have any of the committee meetings and all of that stuff. So I didn't have to do all that church minutia. I realized I had the best of the world there. Yeah. But not too long into that 14-month period, I realized, wow, I really was called to be a pastor. And I was a pastor 2.5 years during seminary and then 5 years after, then came to the seminary to train pastors. And that was good use of my skills and good use of, the stuff that I could bring at that point. But that's still my heart, to be able to preach the word, to reach out and touch a person in a crisis moment. There's a guy in the church who I didn't think I was doing anything out of the ordinary. He was going to have heart surgery, and I went up at, 5:30 in the morning and had prayer with it before that surgery. And every time he sees me, he thanks me for that. Like 5 years later. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh, that's what it is to touch someone with ministry. And so that, if I had to say, what is the thing I was really called to, and I was a high school debater. So finishing high school, I thought, of course, the logical extension of that is law. Yeah. So I started at University of Northern Colorado in pre-law program. And that there were some things that happened that kind of changed that. But it was very clear as I made a rededication of my life to the Lord at that point as a college freshman, that a part of that rededication was the statement, Chuck, I can make more out of your life. And that was the initial seed of the call to ministry, and it just emerged from there. And I had lots of opportunities in a small church we were part of to be involved in some, leadership kinds of roles, even as a college student. And so began to grow that skill. Did my first sermon, long before I was done with college, long before I was in seminary at my home church and that sort of thing. So it really grew that way. So, looking back on the whole career, lots of great stuff, lots of good opportunities, but the idea of pastoring, caring for people still is the favorite part and in the most real part of the call. Yeah. Well, it will be, and I know that you find ways to do that with the new, part-time work that you're doing in the consulting and so forth. We'll circle back around to that in a little while towards the end of our time together. But, as you have worn different hats and as you have had different experiences, and there's two words that come to mind for me, like for you, like if you were to say, like, how would you describe Chuck Hiatt? Okay. This would be good. Yeah. So here's honestly, like these are the two words that I thought of when I was thinking about our time here that we were going to spend together at this table. There's two words that just came to my mind, and it's steady and consistent. Those are the two words that just came to my mind immediately. Yeah. And I don't know if you've been told that before. I don't know if you take that as a compliment or whatever, but those are the two words for me that really just came into my brain for as long as I've known you. And so I was just thinking about just maybe some key contributors, people in your life, or ways that those characteristics were created within you. Is there anything that you would say where you learned that from? Is that just your personality? Is that something that you've seen just God do in your life? Yeah. And by the way, I think your words are insightful. They're pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I've heard those before, and I probably would use something like that to describe myself. How I actually got to that point, I think, is more personality and kind of innate. I'm not sure it's profoundly learned behavior. My seminary graduating class adopted a theme from a popular book at that time, back in 1971, called In Search of Balance. And I had always kind of been moderate in kind of various approaches to lots of things. Yeah, I guess St. Benedict would call it moderation in all things, that sort of thing. But kind of that striving for balance and, being consistent. And with the advent of lots of reading in the area of innovation and creativity and that sort of thing, I probably began to flex my risk muscle a little bit more.
Okay.
And that was through various books I read and the experiences I had in that way. But it was still sort of in that sense of, okay, what's the balancing act, or what's the appropriate thing? As a pastor, I kept track of the hours I put in various elements of ministry. Not that anybody asked me to do that, but I needed to do that so I could look back over the past week and say, did I underpay study and sermon preparation and overpay administration, or overpay visitation, or underpay visitation? And I could look at that, and I realized as a pastor, I could consistently do about 52 hours a week, including Sunday. Some people say, well, Sunday's not a work day of work for the pastor. Well, follow me around.
Yeah, no,
because this was, the Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday evening service.
Yeah.
That was the day of work for the pastor. But if it got beyond that, I began to realize that I was kind of redlining, and I'd need to pull back. And there were times it had to. One week, as a pastor, I had 3 funerals in 1 week. And it's like, that you learned to get better at preparing those. But my leadership said, you got to take a week off, just go away. So they just, they were helpful in kind of making that happen. So having that sense of balance. And, as I think about my life and what I wanted to do with it, probably, maybe 30 years ago at 30,000 feet in an airplane, I was reading a book talking about all of our organizations have developed or are in the process of developing mission statements. You need to have a personal mission statement as well. And I'd never really thought of that before. I identified the call to ministry and that sort of thing. So I took out my yellow legal pad and I started writing. And I wrote, I'm going to use my gifts and graces to advance the cause of Christ while caring for my family in the best possible way. And I've gone back to that about every 5 years or so to say, okay, does this need to be tweaked? And it still works. It's still the appropriate. And the gifts and graces phrase comes out of the Methodist tradition, actually. We had Methodist students who were studying at Sioux Falls Seminary at the time, and they talked about that phrase. And it really meant a lot to me. I understood giftedness, but the idea of using your graces to apply to what you're doing in life. And I realized, as I look back on all of that life that I told you about at the beginning of this, God's grace has been amazingly apparent now. So I want to use those gifts and graces to advance the cause of Christ in what seemingly became a variety of ways, but I still focus on that. And then the phrase, while caring for my family in the best possible way, you could say, well, to make as much money as possible to care for no, that's not what I mean. It means caring for my family, being present, being loyal and faithful and committed in that way, and having the sense of balance, being at those events, having those date nights with Janelle, a variety of things like that to say, okay, that's a mission that gives me a sense of meaning. And it still works.
Yeah. Well, and as I hear it, and I've heard it before, of course, because I remember talking, we've shared those kinds of, you've had us to go through that exercise on Wednesdays and noon, but you say it still works. I would say that still works. That could work for most people, right? Because if we did an inventory of, if every listener right now would do an inventory and started writing down what gifts have I been given?
Yeah.
What grace do I have? How have I been shown grace? How am I showing grace to others? All those types of things. And then what I love there was caring for my family in the best possible way, because that, I think, changes. Like had different seasons.
It does.
And there are some seasons that are just busy. Like, when you're on the road, okay.
Right.
So if I'm on the road, how do I still care for my family in the best possible way while I'm not able to physically be present?
Right.
And it's not just, okay, yes, I got my phone call out of the way, right? Yeah. Or the FaceTime or whatever.
Yeah.
And I look back on just when my kids were young, and especially when I was growing RESGEN and I was speaking all over the place and just saying yes to everything. And, as the ministry is growing and I remember when watching Chase open his birthday presents for the second year in a row on FaceTime because I was stuck in an airport.
Yeah.
And Laura saying to me, this is not working, and you're not caring for us in the best possible way. We understand the demands of the ministry and my drive. Yeah. But we need you to be a little bit more like Chuck and steady and consistent. But those were those are lessons that I had to learn. And so I love how adaptable that is really to each one of our lives, and if we'll allow it to be.
Right. And it has embedded in it, I think, the adoration phase of God gave me these gifts. He gave me these graces. Now, what is my stewardship responsibility?
Exactly.
Out of that to,
and the stewardship is key.
Advance his cause, but care for my family.
Yes, it's so key. And you even talked about it just a minute ago too, when you talked about, like, am I overpaying, sermon prep? Am I underpaying this or whatever? Which, again, I don't know if you had a mentor that kind of taught you that, or if, again, that's just kind of just more your mindset. Stuff you live. Yes, but it's so good, because a lot of times I think, you were able to bring that into the job context.
Yeah.
Which was super helpful for you just in allocation of hours and productivity and like making sure I had this many hours on, sermon prep or whatever. But think about if we did that, are we overpaying in our career, but underpaying on our marriage?
Absolutely.
Are we underpaying on our relationship with our kids and our families? And then what about our friendships? Are we overpaying on our hobbies?
Yeah.
And underpaying on responsibilities, or are we overpaying on Netflix? Or whatever it is. Yeah. And, so that's a really good statement, Chuck, and just has me thinking just about just in other areas of our lives that's applicable.
One of the seminary students that I had interacted with at one time talking about this said the way he had adapted that concept was he broke the week into 21 segments, morning, afternoon, and evening, times 7 days. So you got 21 segments. And he agreed with his church he would give them X number of segments. I don't remember the exact number at this point. But he would preserve those other segments for family and hobby and different things. So that's another way of looking at this, to say, okay, what did I use? At noon, what did I do since 8 o'clock? What did I get accomplished? Was it this or this or this? Mm-hmm. Was I on task? Did I do what I wanted to do at that point? Or did I just kick back and get the downtime that I needed to stop redlining, And that kind of helps you balance that.
Yeah, one of the guys that a mutual friend of ours, and he's been a part of my life since I was 12 years old, and has been a guest on the podcast, Read to Breathe. So he talks about he's the best block thinker that I know. He thinks in blocks, and all of that. I tried it. Mine's more of like a stew. I think in a stew, maybe because I'm hungry, but I think where it just seems like sometimes it's just all in a big pot and it's all picking up the flavors of everything else. So I have to really discipline myself to think in blocks, or to do what you're doing and saying, hey, I'm only going to focus on this at this time and not allow other things to rob, the accomplishments that I need to accomplish here, or whether that be work, family, that kind of thing. So that's good. All right. So I want to talk about an experience that you had. I think it's been a couple summers ago now.
Yeah.
Where it's on a day that's much nicer than we're experiencing right now.
Yeah,
This podcast is not going to air until probably a month from now.
Okay. We still won't be.
But we still will not have we will not have green grass by that time, because we are under so much snow here in Sioux Falls. But you're out golfing and you have an experience that really you were not planning.
No.
Your family wasn't planning. So share real briefly about that experience and what happened. And then I just have a question.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what happened? It was actually July 21st of 21. So it was a year and a half ago.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. It'll be two years this summer. And I was waiting to join my foursome to golf. I got there a little bit early. I had a meeting with the pastor before that. So I went, got my golf cart, and I was out just, hitting balls around, kind of killing time waiting. And that's the last thing I remember. So what I'm told is I ran the golf cart into a spruce tree, knocked myself out of the cart, and apparently knocked myself out. And so I was laying there in the ground, and the beverage cart gal found me. So she gets me up. I don't know, how that happened. It gets me back to the clubhouse. They call an ambulance. So they come, and then my friends arrive. It's like, okay, well, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And one of my friends knew where I leave my keys and all of that when I'm golfing. I'm not carrying all that stuff in my pocket. So he got that. He got my phone. He found my phone and called Janelle, which was rather shocking to her.
Yeah.
So the point of the story is I don't remember what happened. Just like a amnesic block there for about 3 hours probably. And then a lot of short-term confusion that was really scary for those around me.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know I was confused. I didn't know I was asking 5 times, how did I get here? What happened? But they were like, what's going on? And so, obviously, when your dad or your husband is that age, you start thinking, well, what's going on here? So the medical team, I was in the hospital for a couple of days, checked everything out, all the heart scans, all the brain scans, found nothing. Well, they found a brain, but didn't find anything wrong with it, So it's really one of those inexplicable events that happen. It's highly unlikely that would necessarily happen again, but it's just one of those things. So that was it was humbling in a sense to say, okay, I can't explain this. I can't make sense out of this because I don't know what was going on. And the pastor that I had met with, I couldn't remember hardly any of the conversation. We had talked about a campaign that their church wanted to do. It's like, okay, you're going to have to he said, well, you made a really big pledge to the campaign.
I'm sure he did.
I said, well, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was the situation. I wore a heart monitor for a month, and once again, they didn't find anything wrong with that. I couldn't drive for a month because it was kind of like, okay, let's make sure this isn't going to happen again.
Right.
So yeah, there it is.
So was there anything that I mean, to think back, and I cannot have the recollection or any of that. Was there anything that as you process this, and you talked about earlier how Janelle's such a good question asker, you need to process. So the conversations that you had with her and even the boys and their families and that, was there anything that you took away from that really, I mean, scary situation in some ways, surprising situation? Was there anything that you took away, that you learned from that?
Well, I think I learned greater empathy for people who've had experiences similar to that, or larger periods of amnesia, or where your life is out of control. You can't control it because you can't explain it, you can't remember it, that sort of thing. So I think that's one of the takeaways. The other interesting one is, being wired as a pastor and a caregiver. It was an amazingly interesting experience to receive care for a month from friends and family, and be dependent on other people for, getting me where it needed to be or whatever it might be. And that's a great lesson for care providers to learn that, you need to learn to be a care receiver at times as well.
Yeah. Well, even just, I mean, for men in general to learn.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because we're often not, we do the caring, we do the providing, we do the fixing, we do those kinds of things. But to say like, hey, I'm going to allow myself to be cared for, to allow,
or to be driven around for a month.
yeah, I mean, when
That's
you have to
humbling.
lay your pride down. Exactly, because I'm sure that as soon as you can get those keys back, you were in the road, you're out on I-90. Just I don't care where I'm going, I'm just going. But yeah, that's, and it's interesting. You mentioned the just the lack of control. Yeah, that you talk about, just in like a new recognition and understanding for that. I think that when things like that happen in our life, or whether it be a sickness or some sort of tragedy that takes place in our family's life or whatever, you realize just that there are so many things that we are not in control of,
Right.
and how dependent upon just the grace of God, like we just talked about moments ago, but like that the you don't remember getting in the cart from the driving range or putting or whatever, and then all of a sudden
I'm in the hospital. Yeah. And I don't remember the ambulance ride or anything.
And anything that could have happened, like something else that could have been so much worse.
Gosh.
I mean, it could have been
really bad.
Yeah. I mean, so just
you could have been in an automobile.
Right. Yeah. And exactly. Yeah. And someone else in the path that you were, but the grace of God and the presence of God, and then to have the beverage cart gal, she probably was like, did I already give a bunch of beverages here? What's the problem here? So
I was able to, I found her later and gave her a nice tip.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for getting me to where I needed to go.
Yeah.
No kidding. Okay.
I think part of that, Tom, is, kind of goes back, you talk about me being steady and, I couldn't be steady at that point because I couldn't explain it. I couldn't make sense out of it. So, that's kind of the downside of that steady, balanced, kind of in control. Because, if I'm going to do something, I'll be planning it out well in advance and kind of, the pros and cons and the strategies and, that sort of thing. Well, I had none of that.
Yeah.
And I still don't. I periodically when I think of it, it's like, none of the pieces will come back. It's just like so bizarre.
Yeah. What an experience.
Yeah.
Okay. So I told you that, that I had a section in our talk today that I wanted. I'm very connected to Tim and John, not so much Aaron. I did know Aaron as well. Of course, he's out in the East Coast now, but Tim was actually my RD.
Oh my goodness!
At USF when I
should ask him some stories.
He probably has some stories. And then John and I were friends in college, and now of course he's on the RESGEN board. We're still very deeply connected. And so I thought, if I'm going to have their dad at the table, I'm going to send them a quick email.
Oh, that's great. I love this.
And so I did proofread them and make sure that none of them were going to incriminate you or anything like that.
Yeah,
but no, it's all good. But the first question that came from them was, why did you allow us to become Broncos fans? So, out of all the steadiness and consistency and discernment you have, Chuck, I think it's better than a Vikings fan, I guess. But how did you allow them to become Broncos fans?
Well, that is credited to growing up in Colorado and to my oldest brother, who took me to my first Bronco game. Okay. So that became a part of it. And yes, it kind of sort of became genetic. Now, there was a time when Roger Staubach was in his heyday that Tim, my oldest, was a Cowboys fan.
Okay.
But we allowed that.
Yeah.
We knew he'd grow up.
He's matured now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
And in recent years, given the sad state of affairs in Bronco land, I've apologized to them, saying, "Well, I'm sorry that I got you into this."
But you have had many good years as well.
We get
sure.
Yeah. Unlike the Viking fans, we do have 2 Super Bowl wins.
Exactly.
Or 3.
Yes, we have learned. I learned long suffering from a few of my mentors, and now I know why.
Yeah. Okay. That's exactly right. Yeah. That's a great question.
All right. Another question for that was, what's one thing that you could learn to make in the kitchen that would change your family's life? So I don't know if they really want you to, if they're kind of, this is like a baiting question for you, where they're like, they want to see if you really know them and to their stomach level.
Yeah.
But
well, I do quite a bit of cooking.
Yep.
And unique kind of things. If I had to answer that question, I would say some fancy French sauce. Not that I want to do it, but that
Yeah.
might change their palate.
Now, I know John's kind of a foodie. Is Tim a foodie as well?
And, he and his wife probably pretty much so.
Okay, so they want you to get more into the cuisine sauces. Okay, well, you are only part-time in your workout, so, you've got a few more hours that you could overpay in that area.
Yeah, well, when my wife Janelle broke her ankle on September 29th, so for about 10 weeks, I was caregiver and cook.
Yeah.
And, I was able to do it. Now, fortunately, many of her friends provided meals for us, to which I would say, hey, that's wonderful. I can cook, but it's tremendous when I don't have to.
Exactly.
But for me, cooking is a sense of creative outlet for me. I start with a recipe and then just go creative on that. Drives my wife nuts because she's very precise.
Yeah. You're like a pinch of this, a pinch of that.
Well, let's try
this.
Lemon juice, turmeric. It's got to help.
That's awesome. Okay, we'll work our way down here. Favorite movie of all time?
Oh my.
Which I realize, that's a big question. It's not even like top 5. I can't even give you a genre on that. That's just for, but like, if you, I don't know if it's you're stuck on the desert island, you can pop in one movie when you kind of choose to watch.
Oh my word, that's impossible to answer.
Okay, let me give it. What movies do you tend to like more? Like action, drama, documentary, comedy?
Action, drama.
Okay,
comedy.
So if it's in like the action genre, is there like one that you're like, that's probably one of my favorites?
The Mission Impossible movie.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Okay, that would be in the action category.
Yeah.
In the comedy, what about Bob?
Yeah.
I can watch that lots of times.
Exactly.
Quote the line.
Quote the baby steps in the elevator.
Yeah.
Sailing and all.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay, this is a really this is gonna get into the thinker that you.
Oh, okay.
What do you wish you really understood?
Oh, wow.
That's a deep question.
That is a deep question.
What do you wish you really understood?
Yeah. Maybe, first thought that pops in my head is understanding how a loving God can give us free will, but still be in control of things.
Mm-hmm.
How you kind of get the balance in that, and why He chose to do it that way, and why relationship to Him is so important. Yeah, that would be that's a inexplicable thing.
Yeah,
and lots of books have been written about it.
Yeah,
those kinds of things.
And 45 years of pastoral, presence and responsibilities in different ways, and it's a great question, and that's where I think the faith in following Jesus is such a it's a lifelong journey.
It is,
because you never fully understand everything there is to understand, right? Especially when it comes to God and things like that. The suffering in the world, and we know that's a result of sin and all of that. But the loving God and getting us the ability to choose, and all the different kinds of struggles that go on in our broken world. And I've stood at hospital bedsides or at families in times of a death and said, hey, God's promises are as true in the dark as they are in the light. And that's, of course, easy to say. It's hard to process at times, and you have to be careful when you say it. But I believe that, and it's been proven out for me. The God's sustaining power in my life. It's been amazing to watch from beginning to now, to say, okay, we survived on this amount of money back in 1970. That's remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we didn't have Juice Stop.
Yeah, that's right.
The amount of opportunities was not as great in the 70s, but yes, for sure, that is something to look back on. And all right, so you mentioned that you're a reader. You read a lot. And again, I know that this is outside of the Bible, and you talk about life-changing books, but we always have guys that are asking the questions of, hey, what's a good book for me to read or whatever. But as you think about books you've read over the course of your life, and I think it was John that asked this question, what book would you say, maybe it's a couple, that have really been transformative or life-changing?
Okay. The book Margin, can't remember the author right now, Richard.
Okay.
But anyhow, it's sort of the idea of creating white space in your life, and kind of going to the idea of balance be a significant part of that. That was a huge book for me when I encountered that. My first dip in the water in the whole area of innovation and creativity was suggested to me by a man who was president of Augustana College at the time when I was president of the seminary. And it was a series of books, 2 or 3 books written by a Silicon Valley consultant. His name was Roger Van Uck. And the first book was a whack on the side of the head. And the sequel is a kick in the seat of the pants. And they both approach creativity, risk-taking from kind of different perspectives. But that really set me on the idea of, okay, let's begin to seek additional ideas. Let's think about creativity. Let's think about new strategies. In the first book, he talks about there's always a second right answer. Now, always is maybe a strong word, but he said you need to look for second right answers. In other words, okay, this is one way of doing it, but is there a second answer that can be at least equally as right? And many times I've discovered that, okay, that may work just fine.
Yeah.
And interesting, Janelle starts reflecting that to me now, saying, well, let's think about a second right answer on this one,
Yeah.
So those would be, pretty significant books in terms of that.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Second right answer. That's good.
Another one, if I can add one more. Bob Buford, Halftime,
Yeah.
Stuck in Halftime. I first encountered him probably when I was about halfway through my career. And it was like, oh my, this is amazing. And I've probably given away 20 of the Halftime books to guys who come to me and say, hey, I don't know, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Of course, Bob Buford he had the luxury. He sold a big telecommunications company. He was, precociously retired and is stinking rich.
Yeah.
Most of us don't have either one of those,
Yeah.
But we still have to answer the question, what are we going to do with the rest of life, whatever that is?
Yeah.
And the idea of Halftime is stop, reflect, think a little bit, get a new strategy. That's a great book.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
And that is a great book. I've read that one as well. That's a good. I want to ask you one more question on their list, and I got a couple other before we wrap up here today. But maybe 2 because they're both so good. But so leadership mentors for you. A couple of the insights that you received maybe from some leadership mentors in your life that you still use today.
Okay. That's really interesting. When I came to work at the seminary in 1979, I was vice president for development. And I was hired by a man who was president. He'd been there 12 or 13 years as president. And he was high demand, kind of driven personality, more on the task-oriented side of things. So he'd push you to do better, and you'd come in with a report. He said, well, that's good, but, that sort of thing. So I worked with him for 2 years. And then he resigned and went another place close to retirement. And then they hired an interim pastor who came in. He had been interim president. He had been president of the seminary, some years back, but he came back for a 1-year interim. And he walked into the fall faculty retreat, and he walked inside the horseshoe-shaped table and shook everybody's hand and asked about their family. It's like, wow, this is really the soft side of management. So I had those 2 models. And he kind of practiced more the soft side versus the hard side, the people orientation versus the task orientation. And so I looked at that. And when I was then being interviewed to be president, I was reflecting on that and thinking, okay, I've seen both. And once again, I think I'll strive for some balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting, a person who had worked for the more task-oriented person continued working for me for a while. And there were a few times I had to say to her, let's think a little bit more about the people at this point on this one. Oh, okay. So, so you're kind of balancing that. So those were, mentors that I had to watch doing the exact same job that I was going to be called to do, and to see how that played out.
Yeah.
And, you need the balance of that. And you certainly have to have that. And people want to know what the demands are, what the expectations are, but they also want to be seen, felt, and appreciated, cared, touched.
Yeah.
So that would be an example of two right there.
Yeah.
Front and center in my experience. Yeah.
That's good.
I've always had in my work, even when I worked part-time during college, I worked part-time at a men's store in downtown Sioux Falls. There was an older guy, older than me, probably, he was in his 50s, I was in my 20s, that really kind of became a mentor for me. And then the many of the years I worked at the seminary, Ben Engbrecht was my vice president for administration, and he was my go-to guy for wisdom. Just older and experienced, and he would take on really hard tasks and sometimes like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do. Well, let's just get it done, that sort of thing. So I've had that opportunity, and I was thinking about that this morning in anticipation of talking about that. I think when I got to Good Sam, I was 53 or so, and I was president of the foundation. I think I sort of became the old guy. started mentoring other people.
Yeah.
And there are, several people doing really good development work in Sioux Falls that were on my staff at Good Sam. So it's fun to look at that and say, oh, okay, we took a risk on her and she's doing this and she's doing really well. And that's a great thing to look back on and say, wow, that's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and even though you have reached, what you just called old guy status, which is more just seasoned wisdom and all of that. You are committed to being just a continual learner.
Yeah.
And you just love learning. Yeah. So what's one of the best things that you've learned over the last 12 months?
The importance of receiving care, starting with my golf cart incident, but especially through Janelle's broken ankle. Many people caring for us in amazing ways that were kind of reverse of what we'd done for a lot of other people. And a commitment then to pay that forward to other people and say, instead of thinking about, hey, somebody's got a health issue, we should take them a meal, actually do it.
Yeah.
Don't just think about it. Get to the point that you actually do it. So that was a really big learning opportunity. And, it was, as many people talk to me about, well, how's Janelle doing and what's going on? And I said, thankfully, the Lord gave me patience, so I could, and she wasn't demanding. She was very apologetic when she asked for anything, because that's the way she's built. But I had the patience to do all that needed to be done, and kind of had to do almost everything for the first 6 weeks, And that's good to say, oh, okay, God wired you so you could do this thing.
Well, and it just goes to show, when you first are standing at the altar and you say, "in sickness and in health," right? You have no clue.
You have no clue.
No idea what that means. And I remember just watching you and my mom, care for my stepdad. ALS.
Yeah.
And just the long battle that he had with that, and those are the things that you don't. You're signing up for them, but you don't know that you're signing, and you don't necessarily think like those kinds of things. And then it's just like, okay, well, it's a broken ankle. Ankles break all the time, right? It's just it's a healing process, and you're back on the side. It's no big deal. But there's a rehabilitation. There's a lot of things there that are just this part of it and that's living life together.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
And walking together and experiencing God's grace even in those moments.
Yeah.
Okay, we gotta wrap up here in just a couple minutes, but I want to talk a little bit just about Hiatt Strategic Consulting.
Okay.
So you finished up your career and thought, let's start something on the side now. Let's start a side hustle.
Yeah.
in my retirement.
Yeah.
So what led you to start the consulting company after you retired?
Yeah. Well, throughout my years of working in fundraising, I'd hired a number of consultants.
Yeah.
That can be an expensive process, and I always kind of looked at that and said, well, that's a pretty good gig. You come in and you do your thing and then you leave, But I never had the courage to launch that when I needed salary and benefits and insurance and all of that stuff. But in retirement, in anticipating retirement, I started reading books about preparing for retirement. And my theory is you can get to the financial number far easier than you can get to the social, psychological understanding of what am I going to do in retirement.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the important thing is what am I going to do with this bulk of time that I have? And the advice I give to people and advice I gave myself is, okay, what's going to be meaningful activity for me? So I started noodling around saying, I'm going to just try this, see if it works, I'd been doing it a little bit on the side, different churches would call and say, hey, could you help us do a capital campaign, or could you help us do strategic planning? So I was doing a little bit of that, but I put it together when I retired and launched it, and it's, the Lord's really blessed it. I still feel retired, but I probably work 20 or 30 hours a week in that, and that's just fine. It's good activity for me. It's meaningful. It's financially beneficial to us in the early stages of retirement. So that's good. Plus, I'm advancing the cause of Christ because almost all of my work is with faith-based charities or churches in either strategic planning or fundraising.
Yeah, because we never retire from that.
No,
and it may not be in launching a strategic consulting company like you have, but it's advancing the cause of Christ as we're golfing with guys,
right?
As we're out, having lunch or at the coffee shop or whatever. That God still wants to use us,
right?
Until He decides to have us breathe our last breath.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and for me, it's teaching, training, bringing the faith element. Obviously, one of my strengths is faith, the sense of, okay, we're going to bring God into this and He's going to make something better, greater out of this. And to be able to bring that to an organization that's maybe struggling, like, oh, we have this dream, we want this $8 million building. Okay, that's great. And you maybe even have it already designed, but the problem is how are we going to raise the money? And to say, okay, how do we get at that? And so this teaching, training, motivating, those are right in my wheelhouse. So it's really fun to do.
So do you find yourself with like some of your favorite or key leadership principles that you share, that you find yourself sharing more than others in consulting situations or with individuals? Are there because you've been in leadership in so many different ways. Are there like a few of your favorite things that you've learned over the years that you just find yourself sharing?
Well, the conceptual framework for my consulting business is what I call the alignment process, which is functioning on a day-by-day basis, doing the activities of daily life that are aligned with your mission, vision, and values. And a time management trainer I heard years ago talked about, if you have those two working together, you're creating a productivity pyramid. And at the top of that pyramid is a laser focus of intensity. In other words, if what you're doing today is advancing your mission, vision, and values as a person, as an organization, if you're doing daily activities that are aligned with that, you have productivity because you're on task and you're moving forward. So that's sort of the starting point, initial conversation. Okay, what is the mission, vision, value after what are we trying to accomplish here?
And depending on how far that's developed, you may have to spend a little time on that.
Yeah. When I first started consulting, many organizations didn't have a clear sense of mission, vision, and values, or they didn't have a mission that was short enough that it was memorable. It had been kind of, everybody wanted a word in it, so it became 35 words, and nobody could really remember that. The idea of second right answers is a concept I bring often into the mix. This one, I'd love sharing this one because it drives some people nuts, but, and you've heard me say this in other contexts, but anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first. And what I mean by that is if it's worth doing, get started, start moving. Abraham, God said, go and I'll show you where you're going. Okay. But if you're a type A, hard-nosed person saying, man, I want to do this perfectly, then we can't do it until we can do it perfectly. Well, then we're stymied. So the idea is, let's get going. Let's have the courage, take the risk. Maybe we fail, we learn, we find a second right answer, and we move on. So
yeah, those are good. All right, one more question, and then I'm going to give you what we call the final word. Okay, and where you just 30 to 90 seconds of whatever the Lord lays on your heart, kind of just share as a final word for listeners. But You've been following the Lord for a long time. You've been in service of the Lord and people a long time. I'd love for you just to share maybe some of the biggest lessons you've learned from walking with Jesus on a long-term basis.
Yeah. The first one is receiving His grace, letting that grace flow over you, and just to sit back at times and let the thought of, He's forgiven me for all of these things that I've done or failed to do or whatever, and His grace is pouring over me. He's sustaining me. He's sustaining my family in the midst of all that's going on, all the chaos, all the controversy, whatever it might be, that, His grace is still there. He's still in control. So that's huge. And then I think the other end of that is, okay, God, I don't know when all of this is coming to an end. And, it looks horrible and it's, a divisive world and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to sit back and really hold on to your claim that you're in control of this and enjoy that fact that in the end we win. And I don't know what that looks like. It's fascinating. When you're in your 70s, you realize that, well, could be 5, could be 10, could be 15 years. Who knows? How much time you really have. But what's going on in that time? What are you doing with it? And that becomes a significant thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the sense of granting that grace to other people. There are very few things that make me upset because of that even, steady keel that I somehow have it within me. But one thing that really upsets me is people who've received grace and don't extend it to other people. I get upset about that.
Right. Yeah. Which that's going to upset the Lord every once in a while too, right?
I think so.
He's like, man, I give you all this grace. I'll show it to everybody else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I do have one more thing. It's just, again, just with all the time of just spending time in Scripture, are there just a couple life verses that have just been meaningful to you?
One that, I'm probably not going to have a tombstone because we're going to be cremated, but I would put it on my tombstone. It would be Ephesians 3:20-21. That God is super abundantly able to do more than we can ask or imagine. I've seen that played out so many different ways and so many different times, and it's such a strong encouragement. And of course, the verse 21 goes on to say, for the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ and His church. So that's the perspective that I focus on, that superabundant power that God has to be involved. So that would be one life verse. The other one I wrote for many years on the bottom of thank you letters to donors, just the reference, not the verse, just 2 Corinthians 9:12. This service that you perform not only meets the needs of God's people, but it causes many to break into thanksgiving. So you think about that in a donor to a seminary, a donor to the Good Samaritan Society caring for older people. This service of your giving meets needs. That's great. But there are many people, family and friends and church members celebrating and praising God because of what you've done. So those are two that I hang on to.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you, Chuck. This has been enjoyable for me. Hopefully, it's been enjoyable for you as well.
Thank you, Tom. Very fun.
This has been great to share this space, and as I mentioned, I'd love to just have we end our time. Most podcasts we end with something we call the final word, just 30 to 60 seconds of just kind of whatever the Holy Spirit lays upon your heart, just to share as a final word with listeners today.
Good. I would frame that around 2 Greek words for time, kairos and chronos. Kairos is the opportunities that come to us in our life. Chronos is the clock, the chronology, the ongoing hour by hour, day by day. And I can very easily get caught up in the chronos of ABC, 1, 2, 3 priorities, work on this, accomplish this, fill these squares, accomplish, and I used to teach time management that way. And I was doing a 1-hour summary of time management for USF freshmen many years ago. And the guy who was president of USF at the time raised his hand at the end and he said, Chuck, those are really good concepts, but what about those of us who don't function that way? And it was like an amazing aha moment that, oh, not everybody is like me. And I can't just teach ABC, 1, 2, 3 priority time management. So I went and found a book called Time Management for Unmanageable People and added that to the curriculum and to my thought process. And that's more the Chronos kind of thing to say, or the Kairos kind of thing of what is the opportunity? I got 3 hours here. Am I going to do this with it? Am I going to do this with it? And what's the greatest value that I get from that? And to make sure that we don't lose those opportunities.
Right.
Because you don't get them back.
Yeah. We can make a lot of things, but we can't make more time.
Right. That's right.
Just once we use it, it's gone.
That's right.
Well, thank you again, my friend. It's really, it's obviously a joy to spend each Wednesday at noon with you, but it's been a joy to spend this hour with you as well. And so thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. Very good. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining me for my conversation with Chuck Hiatt today. I hope you enjoyed listening and found it to be both meaningful and helpful. If so, I encourage you to share it with others so that they can enjoy the content as well. If you'd like to connect with Chuck and or his consulting company more, you can do so at hiattsc.com. All right, thanks again for joining me today, everybody. We'll see you next time for another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others.